Gut instinct built a lot of great businesses, but today it's also breaking them. Let's talk about how to stop guessing and start winning. Hey guys, as always, welcome to Data Lens, the short series where we talk about market research in the outdoor hospitality industry. Today, I'm here with Scott Barr, the president of Cairns Consulting Group. With over 35 years of market research experience, Scott has a wealth of knowledge to share, and I'm here to ask him the questions that you want to know. So let's hop in. On today's episode, we'll be talking about from gut decisions to smart decisions, why going with your gut isn't a strategy anymore. So Scott, hopping in, what do you think?
We respect people's gut opinions, but we don't use them to make major decisions. And that, I think, kind of cuts to the issue that we're going to discuss today.
Awesome. So let's hop right into the questions here. So Scott, how do we turn true instinct into informed decision making instead of expensive guessing?
That is, I think what I'd like to do is just really start at the top of that, which is, people will say you should go with your gut. And in some cases in life, maybe your personal life, sometimes when you're making that kind of decision, your gut, there's something about, the situation. For example, say you're a mountain climber and you're climbing up the mountain and you just get a bad feeling and your gut's telling you maybe you should turn around, and you can't identify why really, but it's like your gut keeps telling you that. And maybe the other climbers are like, you're acting weird, and you are saying, my gut tells me we should turn around, and you might not really know why. There's probably some cues that have created that situation. And in many cases, and if you go out and search the mountain climbing literature, you'll find many situations where people were saved or not because of the whether or not they followed their gut. In that case, their experiences created that situation. There were cues. It could have been barometric pressure. It could have been the weather. It could have been just something about the situation that created a feeling that you have. And it could be that situation. Maybe you're walking down the dark alley, and maybe the hair's standing up on the back of your neck. Maybe you should turn around. Yeah, it's safe. It's a safe thing to do. And maybe maybe it's a bet. You're in Las Vegas and your gut tells you to hit, on 20. Don't do that. But your gut tells you that you should do it. And that leads us probably into why that's not a great idea in many cases. First, your gut, as I mentioned before, there's something that's happening that's leading you to that. But you can't rely on it because you're not identifying. Because if you're saying it's my gut tells me this, you don't know the reasons. You have no way to identify what are those reasons. Now, if you can say my gut tells me this because of this and this and this and this, well, now that's not your gut anymore. That's more reasoned. You're thinking of it from a more reasoned perspective. You're actually looking at evidence that's creating how you feel. But if you don't have any way to back up that evidence, what you've done is you've taken a risk. You are rolling the dice. You are banking on the fact that you're going to get an ace on that 20 hit. So, and you have depending on what cards have been dealt, you can do the odds on that. It's not very good. So your percentage of getting that hit is low, unless you're a cow cutter, but we won't go there. So essentially what you want to do is you do want to play the percentages. In the case of 21, if it's the last card in the deck and that maybe there's two cards left and that three aces have already been played, so one of those two is an ace. Now it's a calculated hit. Now you have a 50% chance of winning. That's a little bit better than the odds when you don't know. what that percentage is. So, what we're all about is the percentages. Is you have to reduce, that gap. You have to increase your percentages. You have to increase your odds. And the way you do that is through evidence. To use the card counting example again, is if you know how many cards have been played, now you know something about what your chances are. In research, what we do is we tell you those answers. We count the cards for you. What we do is we go in and we gather the information that supports or not what your gut is telling you. Again, what I'm saying here is people shouldn't just dismiss their gut, acknowledge it, and then investigate. It can be a great cue for you. You could be on your park one day walking around and maybe something just doesn't feel right. And you might tell yourself you're being dumb. Well, you know what? In that case, you should investigate. There's something that's impacting that. And that can be in any part of our lives. But if you're in business and you're looking to make a decision, and depending on what's at stake, if you're doing this for a company and maybe there's millions of dollars at stake, are you willing to do that based on a guess? Because that's what it is, really. It's a guess. You're guessing on, this feeling that you have. And if you take that to, the CEO of the company, what they're going to say is, well, where's your evidence? Where's your research? And that's where we come in. We're going to give that to you. We're going to give you that evidence. That's either going to say, yes, you're correct, or no, you're not, or alternatively, you might be somewhere in the middle. And this is, we're going to go back to a previous topic, which is the idea of confirmatory versus exploratory. This is a situation where we're going to talk about confirmatory. This is the situation that warrants confirmatory research, because what we're going to do is confirm one way or another what someone's gut is telling them. And so we're going to go out and investigate it from that point of view. Is it go or no go? This happens in feasibility studies, for example. We do a go, no go kind of analysis for people, and a lot of organizations do. So what you're saying is that based on all this evidence we have, it works or it doesn't. We've gathered all the information. We've done the financials. We've looked at the market. We've looked at the competitive situation. So here's our answer. Because what happens in most of these cases, people come to us with a gut feeling. They have a property, or they have their eyes on a property, and they say, this is going to make a great glamping park, or this is going to make a great RV park. This is going to make a great campground. I know the location is great. Well, that's your gut telling you that. What we do is come in and we evaluate it in a very detailed manner and tell you whether or not it's a good idea. And it can be confirmatory. We can confirm it or not, because maybe the answer is no, because there could be, local ordinances and regulations that impact this. You could have issues with utilities. You could have environmental issues that you can't get past. Or maybe just the cost to bring in materials and build is just so overwhelming that your break-even point is so far down the road, or you would need to have an ADR that's through the roof that the market is unwilling to bear. So those are the things that you do when you take someone's gut and you investigate. And in many cases, a person's gut was, it was pretty good. They saw it. There was something about it that said, yeah, I think this is a good idea right now. But we're gonna make sure that you don't make a multi-million-dollar decision or mistake based on that. And the bottom line too is the investment in what it takes to do this research is well worth it. Yeah, it might cost you a little bit of money to do it, but it's worth every penny before you sink any money into any kind of development. So yeah, that's to me in a nutshell what this whole idea of using your gut. You can use it as a tool. It's one of the tools that you have, but it's not the end all for decision making.
Interesting. And thank you so much, Scott, for that insight. That's really powerful. So, moving along here, how can research reveal blind spots intuition often seems to miss?
This applies a lot to what we were just kind of discussing a moment ago. But I can say that in all the years of research, in pretty much every situation, something pops up that was unanticipated. It can be any idea that someone has. It can be any kind of program someone wants to develop. It can be a product. It can be an approach, a marketing campaign. It could be a strategy that the research will reveal that. And this is where the exploratory part comes in. The overall approach is confirmatory because you're going to confirm or not what your gut tells you, but you're going to explore all the different contributors to the outcome. And you have to make sure this is where you need to have a very exhaustive approach to it, because you want to make sure that you don't overlook anything. And I remember early in my career I worked with an organization that told me that like nearly all of their customers were women. And so their entire marketing campaign was designed for women. Everything they did, how they positioned their product, everything about it was designed for women. And I convinced them to do some research because we were just kind of looking for some opportunity there. And they just said, and I asked them, it's like, how do you know that it's all women? And they said, well, that's what we feel like. Our gut tells us this is a product for women, so we think it's all women. They hadn't done any work with their database or anything to explore this. So I went in and actually did the research and the analysis, not only on their database, but going out and asking their customers, 40% of whom turned out to be men. So instead of what they thought was like an 80-20 split at best, turned out to be 60-40. That's a huge blind spot that they were missing out on in their marketing. It was gigantic, and it really changed their entire way of thinking. They had to start over on their strategy. They had to start over with their marketing. It boosted them tremendously to finally understand that they were appealing to men, but they were avoiding marketing to men in that situation. So again, a gigantic blind spot for a company that was at the time struggling a bit. And it because again, they weren't out there doing the necessary intelligence gathering. They were going with their gut because the product on the surface seemed like it would be one that appeals to women. And so they went with their gut that this is a women's product, and they almost failed in their venture because of that.
That's fascinating and very interesting too, because it's like, as you said, the whole confirmatory piece of just going with your gut, and that almost could have ruined them. And instead, it's actually a pure perfect anecdote of being able to come back and actually succeed from it.
Yeah. Right. It's like you can, and this happens a lot. Sometimes it's on a smaller scale, and it's not as clear cut as that. But it does happen quite a bit. And if you're in a very competitive situation, regardless of what industry you're in, if you're in a competitive situation, those little nuggets, that little bit of movement sometimes can be the difference between success and failure of whatever it is you're doing. You could be, again, if you're a campground or you're in the product world, those things, when you start looking at margins and you start looking again how those are applied to your business model, being able to address some of those, to find those blind spots, to find that hidden stuff, again, because most companies have made decisions based on their gut, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And it's again, this is what we're going to do, because regardless again of the situation, we'll reveal blind spots through the research process, because this could be exhaustive. We cast a wide net, and we will make sure that we find those blind spots and opportunities. That's what they are. Those blind spots are opportunities for you.
Definitely. No, and thanks again for that input. So I think we kind of touched on this a little bit, but if you wanted to kind of wrap it up or summarize it real quick. So what simple research steps validate ideas before spending?
The research steps are to document what it is. When you start talking about your gut, what it is, that could be your hypothesis. It's research 101. What's your hypothesis? That's your gut. My hypothesis is that our campground is a family campground that appeals to weekenders primarily, who are staying in small RVs and tents. That could be your hypothesis. It's at the upfront of your development, or it could be where you think you're at. And then from there, what your next step is going to be to analyze your internal data. Are you truly a family park, or is it just what you see and you think you are? What percentage of your guests are families versus just couples or large groups? That's what you want to do next, is use your own data to establish whether or not that part of your hypothesis is correct. Evaluate your internal data to see what percentage of your sites are devoted to small RVs, small towables and tents versus full hookups, pull through or back in sites. What percentage does that make up? Not just in guest nights, but also in revenue. You want to look at it from those two perspectives. That's your first step. Analyze your internal data and length of stay. When do they arrive? When do they leave? Are you missing midweek people? Are you just marketing for the weekend? Hey, come stay with us for the weekend, when the reality is maybe you should be finding more midweek guests. Where do your guests come from? Are they local, or are they coming long distance? Again, part of your own internal data set. This is your first approach to research. You're going to go in and analyze the data you have on hand. The second step is to actually go out and start gathering information. We've talked about this extensively, that go out, talk to your guests while they're there. Ask them how they found you, ask them how their experience is going. Just have a dialogue and a conversation with your guests. And then the third step is to actually go out and start to quantify some of the things. Return intent. How many of your guests intend to return? How many will recommend your campground to someone else? What do they like most? What do they like least? How was check-in? How was their site? How was cleanliness? How were the toilet? All those, the laundry list of things of the experience people have. And so there's your process. And now what you're going to do at the end of it is you're going to say, okay, we said we were a family campground. Our guests are typically weekenders, and they stay in tents and small towables. What's the reality? I would almost guarantee that in there you will find surprises, that maybe a larger proportion of your revenue comes from some other segment, that you're missing out on maybe that solo traveler because, for example, they show up and they're typically not very demanding. They keep to themselves maybe a little bit more, and they may be kind of the unnoticed guest, so I'm just throwing that stuff out, obviously. But that when you go through all that, at the end of the day, you're going to either confirm or refute your hypothesis, and you're going to see from that entire process that I just outlined, where did things shake out at the end of the day? Do we need to change again? Do we need to change how we position our campground based on these results? Because before, we were positioning ourselves as a weekender family campground, when the reality is we have some overnight guests who are solo travelers going across the country, and they're a huge opportunity because they're great guests. They're low maintenance, and they come and go, and they have a nice site, and they're reliable. So again, these are the things. That's that process, and it all starts with a gut feeling you have, maybe, and it can start there, but it shouldn't end there. That's if you want to visualize it, that's the start. That's your entry point, is your gut feeling. It is not the end point. It is just the beginning of something that is going to create an entire process after it that is fun and exciting from our perspective, but we're weird about that. So
Well, And that's such an interesting point that you bring up. It's like the gut feeling is the start point, not the end point. Because I think that a lot of people could really benefit from that. Just take that and run with it, literally. And we're helping here to help them along the way. So
Well, we're going to make t-shirts. I'm on a t-shirt kick. So
your gut feeling is the start point, not the end.
Yep.
Hashtag market research.
Yep, there it is.
Love it. Alrighty. So I guess piggybacking off of this and kind of talking about more applications. So Scott, how can outdoor hospitality operators test demand and pricing before doing anything? Before building anything or doing anything?
Demand and pricing, that's kind of at the core of doing feasibility studies, but also, and we talked about this a lot in the past. We haven't talked about it a lot recently, but I think this time of year especially, it's good to revisit this as the peak season has ended in most parts of the country, that now's the time to reevaluate. And as a campground owner, you should update your business plan, update your marketing plan, and within each of those, you should have an outline of a market analysis. That's going to look at demand. Where's the market going? Importantly, where's it heading? That's part of what we do. Again, we offer market analysis, we offer projections. Based on the data we have, which we have a lot of, we feel comfortable in doing that and being able to say what parts of the market are growing, which are contracting, which are staying the same, and doing that for the local area that you're in. And where are your guests coming from? There's a lot to that. There's a lot of components, but that's part of that demand. What is the demand? What do you have? What's the overlay between what you have and what the market wants right now? And there's a lot of gaps in there, and that's why we're seeing some stagnation within the market right now. I have a lot to say about that, and hopefully some people will want us to explore that a little bit more in detail, and we probably will. But it's one of those things that we're going to work on for the new year in 2026. And then the other part was, like ADR and rates, what should you be charging? Again, this is an area of intense interest across the industry right now. A lot of campgrounds are struggling with this. The market rate now is very sensitive to the cost. Even if some people have held steady and they're still getting pushback, and you probably will get pushback still for a while. But the best thing you can do, in my view, for ADR, look at what the competition is getting. Look at where you stand against them. Make sure it's apples to apples comparison. If don't compare, if you're a smaller park with fewer amenities, don't compare yourself to a huge park with a ton of stuff, people with water slides and rides and everything. Don't do that. That's a setup for you. Charge what's fair. You're probably not going to be able to charge the same as those parks again. And if you're a larger park with all that stuff, your guests are willing to pony up a little bit more for those things. So you have to make those adjustments. Work with the OTAs. Work with the organizations that know this, and they'll be able to help you with that a lot. Because they have their own internal databases. They know what people are charging nationwide for an apples to apples comparison. We do some of that research ourselves as well within markets, within your footprint. Not because we'll do it from the perspective of not just ADR, but capacity and market saturation, which you won't get typically from an OTA because their motivations are a little bit different. But they are good. It depends if you have a PMS too. Some are combined. You can ask questions of them. I think a lot of them have really good internal information. But those are again, it's a challenge. Just make sure don't leave money on the table, but also don't jack up your rates so that they're not achievable for some people. Again, knowing full well that right now people are highly sensitive to the daily rates. We're hearing about that quite a bit in our work. So, those are the things. I know it's tough. it's a tough market right now, but by being a little bit more attentive to some of these things, you'll come out a lot better in the end, because it's going to help you do better at what you're providing your guests.
Awesome. As always, thank you so much for that insight. And so, last question of the day here. So, Scott, what's the secret power smart founders and owners make and or use?
The secret power that they
Yeah.
use, it's being able to wrangle snakes. It's being able to take people and resources from disparate departments, functions, and bringing them together under a clear vision. It's having that clear vision that again wrangles all those things. And anyone who's in a position of leadership knows exactly what I'm talking about. I've also done enough employee research to say that the organizations where their leadership has that clear vision and communicates it clearly, is transparent in what they do, is accessible, they're the successful ones. They're successful in their jobs, and their companies tend to be much more successful as well. So that's really the power. And sometimes that vision, will go right back to the very beginning of our conversation, can come from your gut. It can come from this gut feeling that this is the vision that I want. Now I need to bring all the resources I have in to make sure, one, that it's achievable. Is it achievable? Is this something we can do? Do we have the resources? If not, what resources do we need? It's part of that information gathering process. It's doing research. It's asking your employees. Again, we do that work. It's also looking at the market. What does the market have? What's your competitive situation? All those things. But again, it can start from a leadership gut feeling and intuition that this is where I think we should be going. And then going out there and finding out if you should. And if you find out you should, then you communicate it to everyone. You tell everyone, and you bring them all together, and you learn how to wrangle them and to use those strengths in the right areas to achieve that vision. That to me is what it really comes down to.
Awesome. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up for today. And as always, thank you guys for joining us today for another episode of Data Lens from Cairn Consulting Group. Today, we covered from gut decisions to smart decisions, why going with your gut isn't a strategy anymore. As always, don't forget to leave a comment or a question for next week's episode. Hit that like button if you like what you see. And as always, subscribe so you never miss a thing. Have a great day, everybody.